Yeah, hello and welcome to a new episode of our weekly Spielworxx chat season 2. We are calling it for a couple of weeks season 2 because it sounds so much more important. My name is Uli Blennemann and I'm having a guest today, Isaac Shalev. And welcome, Isaac. How are you?
Oh, thank you, Uli, for having me. I'm very excited to be here for season two. Now you've worked out all the kinks, you've figured out all the camera angles, and now you can welcome guests like myself. Thank you.
Yes, of course. So I had Bloody Ben earlier, so he's history. Now it's a true guest in season 2. So that's what it is. And we have already some viewers. And Daniel, hello Daniel. He's saying I made it in time for once. Yeah, normally he is late. So excellent. And we have Matze, we have Rainer from Munich, we have Claude from Quebec here. Good seeing you. Um, Isaac, of course, is not only a noted game designer but also co-author of this fantastic book here. So it's building blocks of tabletop game design, and together with the fantastic Jeff Engelstein. Hopefully, everybody can see this. And really, if you do not have this book, get out tomorrow buying it. It's so useful. It's a wonderful read and a wonderful tool for everybody professionally in this hobby, in this industry, really. And Isaac, thank you for doing this book. So it helped me in so many ways already. So Spielwork advertisement right now and very quickly. Let me briefly mention that the Tharos Kickstarter will begin on February 19, and there will be also news at my website tomorrow, and I'm also mailing out a newsletter tomorrow with more details. But now back to you, Isaac. Please tell us something about yourself, your background.
Well, thank you for doing that wonderful pitch for building blocks, even ahead of the Spielworxx advertising. That's
You said I'm paying in euros, not in dollars, so I'm moving it up front.
I, yep, I'm logging into my TransferWise account as we speak. No, so I first off, I'm just really, really appreciative, and I've had the opportunity to do some more work with Jeff, and we're hoping to release some more content for building blocks in the upcoming future. But basically, for folks who don't know me, my name is Isaac. I've been designing games since about 2013. And probably my most well-known title is Saikatsu. The upcoming title that you should be looking out for if you're interested in following my work is called Waddle Downtown. It's a game about penguins coming to visit museums and touring different parts of a city. So you're moving them all around the board. And I did that with Raf Koster, who you may know because he's a noted video game designer, or as I like to call him, Uli, an actual famous person. Someone who does things like Star Wars. And yeah, so Raf was just a delight to work with, and WizKids is a fantastic
Yeah.
publisher. So look out for Waddle Downtown. Beyond that, an American game designer. I moved from Connecticut to North Carolina during this pandemic, and basically I'm cooped up at home with 3 kids and a dog and a lot of meeples.
Yeah, so really check out this game. I saw some pictures today at Twitter, so it looks also very nice, good graphics. So please check this game out. But Isaac, you're also a partner in Inverse Genius. What is Inverse Genius, please?
So Inverse Genius is an umbrella of podcasters and other game content creators. It started about 13 or 14 years ago with a podcast called On Board Games, which was one of the 3 podcasts here in America talking about board games, headlined by Donald Dennis and Eric Dewey. And about 7 or 8 years ago, they invited me to join as a host. And so I've been sharing the hosting duties with them over these last 7 or 8 years on board games. So you can go to onboardgames.net to sign up. And there's a bunch of other related shows in the Inverse Genius umbrella, some of them focused on mini games, games in schools and libraries. We even do a show called Fortnightly with Bruce Vogue. And that's a wonderful show where we really just talk about something nerdy and interesting that's not board games. I talked last time I was on about my listening to the top 500 records of all time from Rolling Stone, my ongoing quest.
All 500?
Well, I haven't gotten to all 500. I realized that if I listened to just one a week, it would
Okay.
take 10 years to finish. So I changed my plan. So I listened to a mix of the top 5 and bottom 5 and sort of come and meet in the middle. So you get these really interesting mixes. But at this rate, it will only take me a year to complete all 500. So that I talked a little bit about that, and Don talked about the weekend and his videos and YouTube thing that was happening. So that's Fortnightly. Inverse Genius is where you can find all the details on all of the shenanigans that we get up to, mostly on podcast.
Yeah, and I will move the info on Inverse Genius, so the web address, and also the info on the forthcoming game Isaac mentioned before in the show notes for the YouTube, so you can check it out there as well. And let me just briefly say hello to Mo from Texas, and there is Matt Wolfe, and he's saying, noted game designer himself, and he's saying Isaac is one of us now because Matt is also from North Carolina. So you see, yeah, well, it's easy. The US is such a small country. I'm saying this as a German, of course, so it's easy. Same state is basically same street, isn't it?
Pretty much. Well, and I feel very honored to have been welcomed into the Game Designers of North Carolina, and I know that I was welcome because I was invited into the Slack, and
Wow.
that's really, I think, in today's world, to invite someone into your Slack is like inviting them into your living room. You're really bringing them into your
Wow.
home.
So,
I'm very lucky for that, but I haven't yet gotten the T-shirt, so something to look forward to.
but I never got a T-shirt from Matt. Matt never offered me something. He never offered me Slack. So let's move on. So because we today we will talk about auction mechanisms in games, and well, it will be mainly Isaac talking and I'm listening, which is much better for everybody. But if you're having questions or comments, please put them in the chat window and we may even respond. So, Isaac, why are auctions in games a topic after all? Why are they important?
I think I mostly blame Rainier Knizia, who seemed to put them in his first 500 games. Uh, but really, if you think about most of the games that we play, there are resources or benefits that exist within the game, and they're limited, and so they need to be allocated. And so every game has to decide what the allocation method will be for these benefits and resources. And you don't have a lot of options when you really sort of break it down, when you distill it. You can do it randomly, so you can shuffle cards and deal them, and that's one way to allocate resources. You can do it via turn order, so action drafting, worker placement, these are all card drafting, these are all methods where essentially it's turn order. I get first choice, then you get second choice. Maybe each one of us gets first choice out of a given hand, but then we get second choice out of the next one. Basically, it's turn order. And then the last one is auctions. Auctions allow players to price the benefits and purchase the ones that they find most valuable. And maybe there's wagering, which is sort of somewhere between random and auctions, and maybe we'll get into that a little bit. But basically, auctions provide what feels like a fair method, and it's the method that probably has the most agency. Players have the most opportunity to get what they want. In something like random, obviously, you have no agency, and in something like drafting, you may not see many options that you might have chosen if you'd had the opportunity. Whereas in an auction, typically all players are included in every auction, and so players can really decide what means the most to them.
Yeah, I think this is really, first, it was well stated, thank you. And I think a lot of people, well, they may understand it, but they are not thinking a lot about this. And I think it is really important to stress auctions allocate resources in a fair way or in a fairly even way, or at least there's a chance that they are doing this. And I think this is most important, and people and game designers should note this. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that game theory and the various auction types that are spun out of game theory are mostly focused on how do we allocate resources fairly, because allocating resources fairly is enormously valuable. What you want in an economy, in a society, is to be able to allocate fairly. And so there's a lot of effort spent in figuring out methods and auction mechanisms that will be fair and also fast and able to be executed without a lot of complexity. So it's something that game theorists are chasing. But the auctions that we have in games, I think, are fair in theory much more than in practice. Um, so that's a whole area we can get into. But I'll say this: when auction participants are equally skilled, you're much more likely to get fair allocations. And when they're not equally skilled, you can get some really, really bad allocations. So auctions can be a fragile mechanism in a game where it's not so clear how much things should be worth.
Yeah, and I think we can even enlarge this a little bit, because especially it's if some people, you are saying the same skill level, but it could be also the same experience level. And I'm seeing the same here in the chat from Daniel. He's saying the biggest beef I have about auction is not knowing the value of things at the beginning. So easy to overpay or let someone underpay without realizing. And this is something, this uncertainty that is there. Most of us don't like uncertainty in their lives, or in general. And of course, if you know, this resource in this game has a value of about 3, and I come to the table new and I'm saying immediately at the auction 10, probably you laugh aloud, and if not, you say you can have it. So this is something that is a problem or an issue. Let's put it that way, isn't it? Yeah.
It is, and I think the concern is most felt on a first play. The first time you open up a game, and this is very common in a lot of like 18xx games, and where you have to buy stock in a company right up front. Or Chicago Express is a non-officially 18xx. And the trouble is that if you've never played before, and even if you have played some other games in the genre, it can be very hard right away to start valuing the companies, to start understanding what you should be buying or selling and at what prices. And that can make for a really frustrating experience when people bid incorrectly and wind up sort of hurting themselves. But I think that the more common outcome is not that somebody makes a bid that's crazy, it's just that everyone feels uneasy.
Yeah.
And like this isn't a horror movie. You're not trying as a designer to make people feel uneasy, but that's what you kind of saddle yourself with when you have, what I sort of consider to be, a blind auction. It's basically an auction where you come in without a good sense of bounding to the values. What should I bid? What's higher? What's low? And I think that designers can do something about that. I think that it's not necessary to have a first round auction. You can assign or distribute resources as a way to say, okay, here's how you start playing. And maybe there's an expert variant where you just do that as an auction. And a lot of games do this already. I mean, not necessarily directly with auctions, but like Terraforming Mars says, you're playing for the first time, here's 10 cards. You're playing for the 4th time, here's 10 cards, buy them for 3 each. Tell me which ones you want.
Yeah.
It's forcing you to price them, but now you've got a couple of games under your belt, so you can. Don't ask players to price things when they have no experience. It's bound to be frustrating.
Yeah, I agree. And hello, Ben, by the way, good seeing you. And one thing is, you said that it's especially difficult for first-time players, or when they play the game for the first time. But these days, with a glut of games, often a game is only played once. So putting an auction in there, people are feeling insecure and uneasy, then they may never return. So in my opinion, of course, this is dangerous. And maybe before we come to the different types of auctions in tabletop games, we can maybe stress on why auction games are not that popular recently because they were very popular at a time, but now they aren't. Or is my observation wrong?
I agree with you. I think I have to agree with you. It's in the book. It's on paper. So I have to agree. I have to at least give it another year or two before I can change my mind. But no, I do agree. I think that auctions have become less popular,
Mhm.
and I think that some specific types of auctions have become especially less popular, and certain types have become more popular. And I think it goes exactly to this issue. Um, Auctions require players to have a very specific knowledge of how much they value something. And when you compare it to drafting, drafting really, at least as a matter of first impression, the first thing you need to know when you're drafting is, what do I like most
Hmm.
out of this selection?
Hmm.
And what do I like most is usually an easier decision than how much more do I like it than the next thing,
Yeah.
right?
Hmm.
So it makes one part of the decision much easier. Then, if you're drafting at that next level of expertise, you're asking the question, does anyone else like this enough that I have to take it now? Or
Hmm.
can I take something else and
Hmm.
get this when the auction, when the draft comes back around to me? And that's still an easier decision than, I wonder what price everyone else has for all of these other items.
Hmm.
So auctions really, the specificity is troublesome.
Hmm.
And even in theory, the reason auctions work in theory is that they're very information rich.
Yes.
Every time somebody bids, I
Hmm.
get information about what people think about values.
Hmm.
And we usually think about auctions in a larger context of that they're not going to happen just this one time, that there are many auctions for a piece of property, or many auctions for, I don't know, broadband spectrum, or for mineral rights. It's not just this one time. And so players in these games can learn a lot and
Hmm.
understand what the bids mean. That's not true in a board game. In a board game, you're this set of 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 players. Maybe you have a meta, maybe you've played with this group before and you have some
Hmm.
sense, but there's not even enough people in the auction for the wisdom of crowds to surface the correct sort of equilibrium price, to really know what the right price is. It's just what these schnooks at the table think. And if you
Yeah.
play with the people I play with, you know that you should not trust them to value these things correctly.
Yeah, yeah, very interesting. And there is already an interesting conversation here in the chat, and I'm repeating a little bit of this. Daniel is asking, are there examples of games that give you a pre-auction round that gives you a sense of the value of things? That sounds like a really interesting way to solve. Oh, now I have to scroll. Have to solve that first play issue. And Mo is answering Dutch auction. In a way, yes, you have some info. And that is the, because there's a follow up question. Yes, so this is the auction where prices come down. So maybe this is now a good way to move to to which type of auctions are available. Not everything, if you want to know everything, again, read this book. There are so many different auction types, but maybe the most common ones or the most notable ones, Isaac, please.
For sure. So I think the auction that is most familiar to everyone is also, I think, the auction that has become the least popular in games, which is the turn order until pass auction. That's the auction where I say a price, and then every other player can exceed it or pass, and then eventually everybody passes, and the last person to bid is the highest bidder and wins. That is a slow auction. It's pretty information rich. It's like the auction in Power Grid works this way. And I think that designers initially went to it because it was easy to explain and it was familiar. And really, it's just introducing turn order so you don't have an auctioneer, so everyone can play and participate. And it seems like it's kinder to new players because you can make a second bid and a third bid and a fourth bid. You don't have to immediately figure out what your value is. You can just start with a low bid and see what happens. But that's a little bit, I think, deceptive. I don't think it's quite so kind at all, actually,
Yeah.
um, because players don't really get a good understanding of why bids are happening until later in the game when they've purchased some things and seen their values and seen their interactions. And they are also psychologically a kind of auction that you're more likely to overbid on because you get into the action.
Yeah.
And
that may be exciting, but what I'm thinking also is I may never have the chance to bid the amount I think it is worth. So because you have to increase your bid or pass, so and maybe in my head I've said I want to have this stone for 12. But I never get the chance because it is 11, 12, 13 and it's out there. So I always think, yes, it's easy, yet long, because it can move so many times around the table. But I always thought, well, this is unfair. So I think I would have bought it for 12, but I could not. So it was 8. When it was at me again, it's 13. So, yeah.
mm-hmm. Yeah, and you certainly could have bid 12 when it was on you for 7, right? Somebody else had bid 7 and now it was your turn. But there's that part of you that's like, I'd
No.
like to pay up to 12. Maybe I can sneak away with this 4. But yeah, there are some turn order issues that make an auction like this, can sometimes make an auction like this feel unfair. And I generally have seen fewer and fewer games going down this road. Probably the replacement auction that one of the two that games are using more and more is the single blind bid.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where usually you take a bunch of coins into your hand, you put out your fist, and then everyone reveals, and you count up who's won. Those auctions are very exciting. They're very stressful. A lot of players get a lot of stress out of them, especially if there's some element of either everyone pays or everyone pays half, but the winner pays all. Those elements really amp up the consequences. But they're exceptionally effective because they're quick and they're decisive. You need a tiebreaker rule of some kind because people could bid the same amount. And you can bid any number you want. You can never sort of be upset that, I didn't get a chance to bid that number. And they're often used to simulate not just auctions, but confrontations. So, for example, in Kemet, you're not doing it with coins, you're doing it with a card, but that blind bid of how much power you're spending, which of your attack cards you're using, is essentially a single blind auction. Game of Thrones does it more with all the coins in your hand and you're bidding some abstract notion of how much power you're going to invest in something. So it really does stretch across lots of different thematic possibilities, and it's very quick, but it's probably pretty polarizing. My eyes are not on the chat, but I imagine that somebody has probably already said that this is a very stressful auction for them.
And not yet. They are still with the Dutch auctions.
They're still. Let's go.
Exactly. So because please go on. Mm-hmm.
So Dutch auctions are also called reverse auctions because the way that they worked historically was that you'd have a declining price. So you could buy this lot of tulips for 1,000. I don't know what florins. I don't know what the Dutch use for currency, but for 1,000, and then it would start declining. It'd go to 950 and 900, and then you'd raise your hand and say, "I'm in." And at 900, you buy the lot, and that's it. So it's kind of an interesting auction because there's only one bid. The successful bid is the only bid, and you're just waiting for the price to reach your reserve point, the point at which you would buy. There are almost no games that use Dutch auctions in this implementation. It's pretty challenging to do. You need a timing mechanism. It's not great. But what a lot of games have done is reinterpret that into what we call the card river or the card market approach or card row, where you've got cards or anything really in a price controlled slot. So the slot costs $4 and the next one $2 and the last one $1. And on your turn, you can buy anything based on the slot that it's in. And then everything slides down and new cards fill in the most expensive places.
Pax Pamir, for example. Pax Pamir or the Pax series where the cards slide down, yes.
The Pax series, Suburbia does this. A couple other examples, Through the Ages does it, but the currency is actions, which is interesting because it's not money, and that feels a little bit different. Another one that you might not think of, but is really doing the same thing with a different functional implementation is Small World. In Small World, when you don't want to take the selection that's on offer, you put a coin on it and you take the next one. Or if you don't like that one, you put another coin on that, and then the person who ultimately takes the selection takes the coins on them. And the reason that this works is in Small World, you're not paying with a currency, you're paying with your turn. That's your thing to do on your turn, but you are being given victory points. These coins that you're laying down are actually victory points. You're being given victory points, so the price, the functional price of taking something declines in a sense. You get 3 victory points if you take this this thing. So it's another way of implementing, and it's a particularly interesting one because it's a game where your victory points can't be spent on anything else. They're not really a fungible currency the way money is in most games. So I thought that one was worth mentioning. There are other games that do this with money, where you put $1 on something and it's actually $1 that you can use to buy stuff. What the Dutch auction does a couple of important things. One is it allows multiple items to be sold at once without turning them into a single lot. So it's not, I buy these 3 or those 3 or those 3, and that's what we're bidding on. It's, you can separate them. I only want to buy this one. But all of these are up for sale at once, which makes the game a lot faster. It allows you to create a market that just has a lot more dynamicism and motion to it. The second important thing that it does is there's no need to set prices. The prices already exist. And so it takes away all of that need to go back and forth and find the right price. The choice that you really have in an auction like this is more similar to drafting. Do I like this card for $4 or not? If not, do I like that one for $3?
I've never thought about this in this way. This is really interesting. Yes, very well explained. And there is one question here from Kitsuki Alba. Doesn't this method risk newer players radically overpaying for auction lots? Is this because, let's say, it's costing 1,000? I want to have this, so 950. Is this a risk of this, or?
It is a risk of this, and even in theory, or not. I shouldn't say in theory. In the field, in game studies, which covers auctions and in game theory, Dutch auctions are susceptible to what we call the winner's curse. The winner's curse is that the winner of an auction is more likely to have overpaid for the good. And there's a few reasons for that. One reason is everyone bidding has some uncertainty over what the true value of the underlying good is. And the winner usually has to exceed everybody else's sort of uncertainty, and it ends up being that unless the winner's estimation of value was in sort of a low probability area, it was 2 or 3 standard deviations from what you'd expect, the winner probably overpaid.
Yeah.
Everyone else's average value was lower, so the winner probably overpaid. That's one cause of the winner's curse. The second cause of the winner's curse is certain auction methods emphasize or create a greater possibility of people making just mistakes in calculation and psychology.
Yeah.
And the Dutch auction is one of those. Because there's only one bid,
yeah, right. And you see how much I'm paying attention, because Kitsuki Alba was referring to closed bid, not to the Dutch auction with overpayment. Yeah. But
closed bids do the same. It's the same thing. That's why the auction that is used in the real world to try and minimize the slippage on either side, so that neither the buyer nor the seller are preferenced by the auction, is what's called the Vickery auction, or second price auction. And you may be familiar from it if you've been on eBay, because on eBay, if I bid $1,000, the system only puts my bid at $1 more than the previous high bid. So somebody else bid 700, it shows that the winning bid is 701. And and it will only escalate the bid as people exceed it. So fundamentally, what it's saying is whoever wins the auction pays the price of the second highest bidder, maybe plus $1. And that means that my best strategy is to just bid my highest valuation, whatever I'm willing to pay, the highest price I'm willing to pay, and I'm never going to pay more than that, and I'm going to pay less than that if nobody else values it too much. So I'm safe in bidding this high number. But those auctions are very hard to pull off in board games. Number one, it's just practically speaking, how do you not reveal what the max bid actually was? It's hard to implement. It's also a little hard to explain and understand. It's not super intuitive. But the Through the Ages digital implementation uses this for bidding on colonies. And it does so because it's a lot faster in an async setting where I may have to wait 12 hours for another player to make a bid on a colony. You don't want that. So everyone just puts in their highest price, and then the winner is assigned at the price of the second highest bidder. So that's a really interesting one. If folks who are interested in auctions should take a look at the Through the Ages analog rules versus the digital rules, and it'll really demonstrate this, turn order until pass versus victory or second price auction.
And Stefan, hello Stefan, and by the way, hello Chris and hello Robin. Good seeing you. Stefan is mentioning Knizia did this second place value earlier, Paradise. I yes. think Stefan is saying, but Rainer has an auction game probably for all of these various models.
I think you can actually know that it's a challenging auction to use in games because Rainer only did it once.
So right, so it must be difficult, must be challenging. But earlier, in regards to popularity of auctions, Ben had an interesting comment, and Mo is following up here. Ben said, recently we had more and more games with less player count. So lots of two-player games or now solo games because of the pandemic. This, of course, is a problem for auction games as well and for popularity, I think. And Mo is saying more and more Euros have less interaction, so play deals this type of meta less and less. So if you're just doing your own stuff, then it's difficult to involve this. Or how do you see this, Isaac?
Well, I think it's certainly true that you're not going to find auctions or many auctions in solo and two-player games, although if you held me to it, I could probably come up with one or two counter examples. But I agree with that. I'm not sure I agree that we are seeing a larger proportion of low interaction games than we have before. I'm not certain about that. It's really, look, in a world where we're playing thousands of games a year, it's hard to, we just have more of everything. But I do think that designers have certainly embraced the card row and drafting as faster alternatives. And generally, I think if I can say that tastes have shifted in a way, I would say that tastes have shifted away from the economic euro. And the economic euro is a higher conflict kind of euro. But I do think that there's less opportunity for auctions because designers are seeking to eliminate the need to do arithmetic, to deal with two-digit numbers. So a lot of times we're doing a lot of work under the hood to distill the decision point without needing the auction mechanism.
Yeah. So Isaac, moving from theory maybe a little bit to praxis, do you have some games you'd like to mention, some notable auction games? Yes, we know it's so hard because of these different types and there are so many, but maybe are you having 3 or 5 you would like to mention?
Yeah, absolutely. So if you're interested in exploring auctions, I would say that Modern Art is probably your first stop. It's, of course, by Dr. Knizia, and Modern Art features a few different auctions within the game. So you're bidding on artwork, and you'll even experience an auction that is a once-around auction. So it's like a turn order auction, except everyone just gets one bid, but it's not a simultaneous reveal. So in other words, it's an auction that strongly preferences the last player, because the last player knows exactly what to bid to win and can bid maybe a lot less than they might have otherwise. So Knizia is demonstrating that auctions aren't just about finding fair prices. They can be used to create privileges and advantages for players based on turn order, for example. So that's one. Another one I would recommend is No Thanks. And No Thanks isn't one that we normally think of as an auction game. In No Thanks, you are trying not to take cards because cards are bad for you, but runs of cards are less bad. So if I have, 9, 8, 7, I'm only going to have taken 7 bad points. And on your turn, you are either placing a chip on the card to not take it, or you take the card and all the chips on it, and the chips are good for you. The chips are essentially -1 bad point. So it's an auction where the value of the lot changes each time it reaches you. So it starts, you see that 7 and you say, okay, it's 7. I don't want it. I put a chip on it. By the time it comes around to you, it's 7 with 4 chips.
Then it could
Now
be
it's
suddenly,
17.
yeah.
Maybe I want it. It also does a marvelous job of making cards value differently for different players. If I have a 6, the 7 doesn't hurt me at all. So I can take it. But I can do even better by letting other players avoid it and put more chips on it so that I can then take it later. So it introduces push your luck to auctions. It's not really push your luck. What it really is it's testing that same auction skill of valuing how other players will value a lot. But because there's no hidden information, you actually have a decent shot at doing that. So No Thanks can be played really casually, or it can be played at very high levels of skill. And at high levels of skill, it feels like no limit poker. And so it's taking auctions into a context that we don't typically experience. No Thanks was designed by Thorsten Gimmler.
Yeah, he's now at Ravensburger. He was lots of years working for Schmidt-Spiele in Germany. For the German listeners, my question is, No Thanks, is this Geschenkt ist noch zu teuer? Is this a German title, or am I totally wrong now? This small box here, this small thing, so maybe Stefan does know, or Rainer. Yeah, yes, so yes, this game is brilliant, but with good players, it's very difficult to play well. Yeah, it is stressful, but well done. Yeah.
Yeah, and it is sort of solvable, but anyone who can solve it, I refuse to play games with, because they should be spending their time on more valuable, purposes for the human good. Somebody needs to solve nuclear fusion. So those are a couple that I think get you started in and give you a nice core curriculum, and also show you some of the capabilities of auctions in games that aren't readily apparent. I want to bring up one other thing that I use auctions for in terms of being a designer and practicing design. I think auctions are an incredibly valuable tool. So I don't necessarily look to make auction games. And when I think back on even my prototypes, there's maybe 2 or 3 that I can think of that were using auctions. But in many of my games, during the design process, I will use auctions. And so remember, auctions are just an allocation method. They're a mechanism you can inject into a system wherever there's some kind of resource allocation. And what introducing auctions into your game in design does for you is it lets you see into players and their minds and how they're working. How are they valuing the resources in your game? The way that they bid can help reveal that to you. With your, if you're lucky, you have a couple of playtesters you use to break games and really find all the loops and find all the places where values are out of whack. Those are the right players to use to create an auction for any resources in your game. and they will zero in on equilibrium prices. They will find the right prices, and then you can just pull the auction out and make the game a market or cost your cards, whatever it is that you need to do. Auctions are, and have been used for thousands of years to find consensus values. So as a designer, use them. They're, especially if you don't have like a Monte Carlo tool, if you don't have a way to do thousands of simulations and things like that, auctions are like a quick and easy way to find good values for your games.
But this is that is an amazing idea in my opinion, Isaac, and Daniel is also commenting on this, using a design for early playtesting and then removing it is pretty brilliant to see what is the value here and on this. So really, yeah, designers out there, I think this is a wonderful idea.
I want to give credit to two people on this, Mike Elliott and Gil Hova, who both strongly argue for using stub mechanisms and scaffolding. The idea that your goal in a design is to explore and find the experience that you're trying to create, and you explore by using various kinds of mechanisms, and sometimes it's just there to create a scaffolding so you can build the design, and then you pull the scaffolding away. So they taught me to experiment in those ways, and the auction is just one of a lot of stub mechanisms that I use to accelerate the construction of a design.
Very, very good. And let us maybe finish this here with a question from Matt. What's the oddest auction game you've encountered, Isaac?
I think the oddest one is probably still Spyrium, which was designed by William Attia, who did Kalis. And so Spyrium, it mashes up worker placement and auctions. And really, I think, mathematically, drafts and auctions aren't different. They're just using a different currency. But he mashes them up because in Spyrium, the way that it works is you've got a grid of cards laid out, and you place a worker between two cards. And as everyone completes placing workers, you start moving into the removal phase, where you remove a worker and activate a card that they're adjacent to. But you've got two options. You can either acquire the card, or you can receive money for the worker that you removed. And both of these are bound to how many workers surround the card. So if there are 7 workers surrounding the card, you can either receive $7 and remove the worker, or you can purchase the card for whatever its base cost is, plus $7.
Interesting.
So break it down for a minute. The removal is creating a Dutch auction, a declining price auction. The card was going to cost, its base price 13 plus 7. It was going to cost 20. I remove this, it only costs 19. Somebody else removes, it only costs 18. So it's a declining price auction. But by removing the worker, I'm gaining money. If I have 2 workers adjacent to the card, I can remove the first worker to afford the price the second time around. So I'm injecting money into the system every time I pass, which has the tendency of inflating prices. Right? So the actual price is fixed at this point. You can't make it go up anymore, but you've injected money into the system, and there's 4, 5, 8, 9 different auctions happening at the same time. It creates these bubbles. It creates these bubbles where nobody's removing a pawn from one particular auction because everyone knows that's really pricey, but they all want it. They're trying to get money from other spots on the board to go pay for that one. Somebody else is waiting for the market to collapse on something and move in really cheap. So it creates a really dynamic and interesting play space. It was not a game that won tremendous notoriety or popularity, and the art was a little dark, unfortunately, and I think that part of what hurt it. But if you're looking for just a kooky, crazy, you've never seen it before auction system that really it plays in 45 minutes to an hour, I strongly recommend Spyrium.
Yeah, and it gets some love here from the chat. So some people are saying that it's a wonderful game and they like it. And Stefan is saying, isn't this similar to Speicherstadt from Stefan Feld in some way? So I don't know actually, because I doubt that I ever played Speicherstadt, but I'm not sure. So I can't. But Daniel is saying Speicherstadt Jorvik is another weird auction game. So
Hmm.
there may be some.
They're using the similar mechanism. We called it a Dutch priority auction. That this idea that as you remove bid tokens, you lower the price. I don't recall if in Speicherstadt, if you remove, you receive money for removing. I think that might be the difference between them.
Mhm.
But yes, those are great. I'll throw one more in, which is Dr. Scott Nicholson's Going, Going, Gone, which is a rare beast. It's a dexterity auction.
Oh.
So, so it's an auction where you're auctioning off a good, and the person auctioning it off is counting down, um, literally counting down, and you need to place your bid tokens into a cup in order to make it count. And it's
Uh-huh.
not hard to do. It's not, you're not shooting from a distance. There's no, but the speed at which you have to do this and which other people are responding to it, you need to get it in the cup. And sometimes in the mad rush, you get the jungle speed, fist slam, and cubes don't make it into the cup. So going, going, gone kind of simulates the madcap action of people losing their minds at an auction. It's an unusual one.
Yeah, and people, Robin, he had some love for Spyrium, but he hates going, gone. So if anybody here in Europe wants to buy his copy, it's currently for sale. So yes, um, let's just finish this off. So first, Isaac, that was really not only a pleasure. So I think this was one of the very best episodes I had, because hopefully the same thing happened with the viewers, because it made me think. So and this is always important. If you're saying, well, yeah, let's, and maybe I'm have to reread the chapter from this beauty here. So as you know, building blocks of tabletop game design, so everybody must have a copy. And hopefully, Isaac, we'll have a chance to drink cheap, very cheap, inexpensive Chardonnay next year at a convention. I doubt it will be this year, but hopefully in 2022 we'll having some Chardonnays together, and because it's a Chardonnay mafia, so
Chardonnay
that's
Mafia. Well, and I'm much more lucid at 11:30 a.m. my time because it's pre-Chardonnay. This is why you got so much content. No, thank you so much, Uli, for inviting me and for having me on, and listeners and viewers, thank you for saying hello and including your insights in the chat. If you want to connect with me, I'm at Kind Fortress on
please do
Twitter.
so.
You can email me, Isaac at kindfortress.com. And my newest game is Waddle Downtown from WizKids, and it will drop in a week. So please buy it and play it, and then rate it well, and then share your honest feelings with me about it later in private.
No, it will be a wonderful game for sure. So yeah, thanks again, Isaac. Thank you very much, everyone. And so next week it will be a regular episode with me presenting Spielworxx and industry news. So till then, bleibt gesund, Black Lives Matter. Bye bye. Bye.